so I do want to kind of dive into this, but first I'll give a quick overview of the year as well, and then we'll talk what are the things that we've seen developers and users really want in this. So our vision as a whole is to build a world where people control their assets, data, and power cards. And I think a lot of us in this ecosystem that we share this vision because, like, Bitcoin started with the idea of your own money, and it's extended to assets, DeFi, the data. I think is, probably known as the person who loves using all of their data, Facebook or similar entities, and the governance is just your voice, your power to actually affect the outcomes of any decisions, right, which you are a member of. And, this is especially true with this, recent world developments. And from our perspective, the way to achieve that is to deliver something that's simple to use, that's secure, and scalable, and is scalable. Now, the way we measure this, right, is how many people actually engage in this world, right? And so we have this audacious goal of getting 1 billion people to actually use this, and through building multiple blockchains. We're about 20 months plus the mainnet, and we're about 1.7% complete, so still a lot of work, but the rate of adoption is accelerating. Now, the way we're doing this is not by building kind of a company, but actually by having an open source that starts kind of at the core with the protocol, but then expands into various infrastructure layers, into various go-to-market and approaches, and various vertical applications that actually serve the end user. So just to mention some infrastructure, kind of the new protocol itself, right, is just a protocol with some open source implementations, and there's a lot of different companies already contributing to build it. At the same time, these companies have their own businesses, they have their own kind of products that are delivered to the user or developer. And so infrastructure ones are like Pagoda, deliver a Web3 developer stack that allows you to build kind of everything, have all the tools, manage your contract lifetime, have analytics, have triggers, and more. And for Mara, which allows you to run private shards, which run inside specific firewalls in a company, and allows you to run contracts, which can process private data pretty much on the same namespace and all the other contracts, so they can actually interact. Beyond that, you have interoperability, right? None of these blockchains is factoring. There's a lot of other things going on, and so from the start, we kind of established to build the most trusted permissionless bridge, Rainbow Bridge. It connects near Ethereum, it's a sort of lifeline. It's very much similar to IBC approach, but it is kind of the only actually lifeline bridge to Ethereum at this point. You have something like Aurora, which allows to run all of the Ethereum smart contracts on Near through a pretty much EVM virtual machine just running as a smart contract. And so this kind of general idea is that as we push for interoperability, more and more of things can be run in the VM on top. At the same time, there is cases when you do need a more custom chain, app chain, and this is what Octopus allows us to do, is to spin out a completely different chain, but then through linking a runtime and through linking a security into Near, you actually have both interoperability with Near and resolve on the chain directly. Now, technology is good, but at the end, it's all about actually, getting applications to build, getting developers to adopt this, right? And so, instead of trying to kind of fit everything through, for example, Near Foundation, which is, as well, a very centralized approach, we have kind of spun out a number of ecosystem funds and verticals that are specifically focused on different types of development, right? So one of the examples is Proximity, which is specifically focused on DeFi applications, and they are, working, helping, giving grants, sometimes helping writing code, and doing anything that's needed to grow these DeFi system. Similarly, you have Human Guild, which is doing that for gaming. They host, founder-to-founder sessions where founders help each other and we figure out details of token economics and gaming. And more of such funds, for example, for sustainability that they're starting. The idea in general that, this ecosystem has so many different verticals, so many different approaches that you want different kind of teams that are solely focused on specific vertical to go in and help out projects. But also beyond that, the world is, vast, and although kind of being global, you still want to have local presence around the world. And so we started that actually in China originally because China has a very different language, very kind of disconnected information space. But since then, we launched already 4 other hubs, and we're launching kind of 3, 4 more in this quarter. The hubs are really kind of a local version of Near. It creates presence, it creates community, it has YouTube. They don't really care about censorship resistance as much at this point, but they already understand kind of this connection that crypto can create. But beyond that, you have games, you have kind of music, art, all of those various things that are coming through the creator. They actually are the source of economic value in kind of our Web3 ecosystem, and they are what pulls in more and more people. And the third final part, I think, that's extremely important is social, right? We are, at the end, social kind of creatures, and social, has been going through a lot of turmoil, and, there's no single kind of current social platform that wants to do censorship, that wants to do kind of the moderation that they are must do. And so they all are trying to figure out how to become more community kind of focused, while you have now new social protocols, social platforms starting up that are actually bring more people into the greater economy. So you have a flywheel that actually accelerates the more you have on the other side. Now, this picture, like we presented this for, a year and a half, this picture always has something missing. And the something missing is, how do people get into the system? Because if you think of, a random creator in the Philippines, they don't have to initial, fee pay to sign up or to mint first things, right? And the answer has been, throughout past 6 months, is a way to onboard users through various kind of tools like Move to Earn, Work to Earn, something to earn, where you don't need to actually buy in to start participating in the economy. You are able to pretty much trade your attention or your time for crypto directly and kind of efficiently. And so Swiftcoin being one that has 100 million downloads already and 10 million users. Trace is launching here in Korea. You have NearCrowd, which has been around for a year. It has 2,000 people working every day, actually collecting data for machine learning problems. And you have Brave, which is direct attention. And so you have all those ways that actually onboard users directly into the system and get them at Now, kind of behind all this is the idea that usability matters, right? At the end, if we want to get to 1 billion people, this means most of the people will not know what blockchain is, what blocks are, hash function, any of these things. Probably a lot of the people think Facebook is internet, right? That's kind of a pretty prevalent understanding right now. And so most protocols don't actually mention how they're going to be building for you, how they're going to make it available, right? You cannot, if you're talking about, how we create a new cryptography, it's really hard to think how do you actually get it to users in a way that and the things like scalability, the things like be going hand in hand with usability. Because at the end, the usability we're doing because we want to deliver a better experience to users, not kind of change when you have, some application becomes successful. security at the end is something that is, like, should be straightforward to the user and should not scare them. So the reason for developers first is, first of all, here, we're all developers and we think kind of, first, in myself being a developer, like, I want to make sure my experience is good, right? Because my experience is good, like, I can spend more time making sure my user's experience is good too. And kind of the idea that, starts is like, well, my experience is good when, the tooling is good, but also the platform itself, the thing I'm building on, does not give me complexity, and at the same time gives me the kind of capabilities and scalability that I want. And so the only way to scale is to parallelize. I think at this point, everybody's agreed on that. And there's just different ways of parallelization, one of which is modularity, right? There's L2, there's L3, there's L4. And it allows to have a kind of more experimentation across the stack, which I think is beneficial for everyone. But it does lead to kind of a overall drop in performance, right? If we're talking about latency, if we're talking about the complexity of UX, of like how exactly you're thinking, and again, like obviously, some of the things are very subjective because you can think of like, well, L2 is a new L1, and then, if this L2 is the L1, then it doesn't really matter. But that's not true. You have lots of L2s right now that you kind of work in parallel. And like the comparison I can draw is back when ETH was coming out, they allowed for a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of different kind of, different GPUs were produced, different mount cards, different CPUs. Like they all tried to fit in with each other and in the same sockets. But you had something like Apple, which kind of did not allow for this flexibility, and it took them more time actually to catch up. But when the innovation curve stabilized, they ended up building more integrated experience, and through this integration, they actually ended up building a more better experience than modular. And so, like, kind of the belief is that a more integrated experience will deliver better UX, and at the end will outperform as well in kind of broad performance the modular experience. And to do that, you need obviously parallelization means sharding, and so you need a sharding that actually delivers the experience, but then hides it from development, right? As a developer user, you should not need to think, where is the application? Is it on this shard or on this shard, on this layer 2 or that layer 2? Like, you should not need to think of it, this should be completely hidden, and the underlying infrastructure should be able to kind of rearrange things as needed to deliver the better performance. That's what we've been kind of building from the start. Now, it's a long journey. It takes a bunch of time to actually get there. We've launched with actually one shard, even though like, most of the stuff we built. We actually resharded the 4 shards late last year, and with the point that there's been zero impact to the developer user. Nothing changes, so it doesn't affect more capacity of the network in minutes. We're launching a chunk-only for users this September, and this is the idea to actually expand more validators on the network, bring in kind of validator nodes that will be validating only specific shards, like rotating, but validating only single shard or a few shards. And through that, pretty much enable us to get to kind of final night shape, where you have no nodes validating all shards. And the final stage is where we get this kind of fully dynamic resharding. It's the idea that at the end, it actually doesn't matter where exactly your contract is, if the network is smart enough to actually allocate you the resources, right? And so think of on near, each contract can get up to a full chain of capacity, right? So, and we actually have this right now. Aurora runs actually on a dedicated shard and has a full chain of capacity, as if they run their own separate L2 or a separate process chain, but they don't need to handle any of the validated stuff. They don't need to handle any of the SSC stuff. They just deal with their own kind of application state. And so the idea here is actually get to the state where it's dynamically reallocated based on the load of your contract. So think of, Amazon where you pay to go for what you say, not for, all the capacity reallocated. On the other side, as developers, right, we want tools, we want, experience, and so kind of from the start, we've been trying to build something that is very pleasant, very nice. We have everything from, command line interface that allows us to interact with blockchain. We have a, I'll show in a second, a tool to create a new app in 5 seconds. We have, all this stack of tools in JavaScript, and Rust, and some bunch of stuff in Python, Swift. We have things like wallet selector that allows us to kind of embed directly into your app. Multiple major RPC providers, including Pagoda and Jira. You have data reads, which, if you're a developer, that data reading is actually a bigger problem than transactions right now. And you just, like, if you want to actually scale, to actually have a million users, you need to cache a lot of data. How to do that? We have a framework for that. We have analytics triggers, and a lot of stuff on Pagoda. You have Rust, and I'll talk about JavaScript, education, and a bunch of other stuff. There's more developers building cool stuff every day. Now, I'll mention JavaScript because, first of all, we kind of have a full launch. Now I'm lost in time zones, but it's 8 tomorrow. And the kind of high level is, JavaScript is probably the most, well, not probably, it is the most kind of used and known language in the developer space. And the idea is that now you can actually ship REST code directly to blockchain without learning any new languages, without kind of needing to figure out anything. It is, getting on the future paradigm is the Rust. It's as simple as, write some, pretty much create your app, select JavaScript, select what frontend you want, and, just run, like you have a JavaScript smart contract, you can, edit it, and just yarn deploy and some testnet, and yarn starts to get the front end running, and you have a pretty much full app by this JavaScript smart contract, and you can go and add it to smart contract and upgrade it actually directly with your deploy. So you have pretty much, in about 15 seconds, you can get a full, like, web-free app running, and it's in JavaScript, end-to-end, front-end, and back-end smart contract, and you can kind of continue iterating on it as you please. And so, links to the Explorer and everything. And so the reason why it's possible is because the team that's working on contract runtime in protocol has optimized the WebAssembly about 7x since launch. And so we end up getting able to run a QuickJS, one of the JavaScript machines, a full JavaScript virtual machine, as a smart contract engineer. So this is the same idea as Aurora in a way, because Aurora is an EVM. Like we took a piece of EVM code and just run it as a smart contract. And so this just showcases you like how powerful you can be on near just taking existing applications, existing platforms, just running them, customizing and building things on top of them. So check it out. It's, there's a QR code or pagoda.co/JS if you are interested and want to launch something today. So going forward, we talk about developers, right? And I mean, developers are close to my heart, but at the end, it's about users, right? If you want to get to 1 billion users, we need, probably ideal developers, but we need that 1 billion users. So we started this from day one, is that we did not want to replicate the account model that pretty much all the blockchains use, because this account model is confusing, and it doesn't, like, if you think of, your friends for not in technology, right? If you tell them, like, hey, can you send me some money to my X5Y lowercase E address, you probably lost them somewhere there. And so we started with, like, how do we get individual IDs? And how do we solve this key management problem, right? People are afraid of kind of keys, right, in general, key phrases, but, and so the idea here, new accounts have a username, like Ilia.near, and a number of keys, right? And So think of them as devices or as, applications. So when you are adding a new device, let's say you're adding a phone, it actually can add a new key, a different access key for your specific device, which means you can always disable it, you can always kind of program it for a specific reason. It's possible to give a key specific permissions and allowance, right? So this is very useful when you want to have for example, your game front end to have this is a special key that only can interact with this game up to some key. And so you can only authorize this key once through login process, and then your front end of your game can now interact with the blockchain on the user's behalf without going to the wallet every time. Right? So that kind of flow where if you want to breed a new animal and you need to go to the wallet to approve that transaction, you don't need to do that. You can just approve kind of breeding as a permission and then just do it as the user interacts. Obviously, you can build customizable policies, right? Like you can think of your phone and your desktop. Maybe on the phone you limit yourself to spend $1,000 per day, and so you're tempted, but also in case the phone is stolen. The more interesting, you can actually delegate to another party some specific permissions. And so the suggestion that I have, given most people are scared about the seed phrase of losing them, instead of just having a seed phrase somewhere stored securely, which never happens, you actually give a permission to a semi-trusted party, like a bank or maybe a group of friends, to be able to recover a seed phrase for you with a delay. Right? So imagine you lost a seed phrase, you need to recover, you call up your bank, they do your normal authorization procedure, and they initiate a key rotation process. It will take, for example, 7 days to actually get there, and so 10 days is good. Now, if banks try to do it without your consent, first of all, you'll see it, you get a notification about it, and you can stop it because you have the key at that point, and you can actually kick them out. Then on top of it, you can actually sue them because you have a legal document with the bank. Right? Now you can have similar a group of friends who can together recover, etc. If you don't have a bank access, and there's multiple other semi-trusted parties you can list in this process. And then the other really cool thing is single-use private key. You can actually generate a private key and then give it to someone to send one single transaction, right? Because after that transaction, that key will be removed from the account, so it's not actually able to. And so that allows you to do really interesting things, including creating an account for someone and then giving it to them to actually claim and rotate it. Right? And so this idea of rotating keys means you can have maybe less secure wallets initially, less secure setup initially, and then as you get more assets, as your account becomes more valuable, essentially just rotate it. And so this goes into security, right? Security I mentioned people are scared of seed phrases, things that get stolen all the time, there's constant issues with contracts, with wallets, with everything. And so that's why going beyond just hey, your seed phrase is your account, how do we get to a state where it is way more active security, right? If you think of that tool, in that tool, we've learned a lot on how to prevent malicious activity, right? Google runs a very comprehensive outlier analysis on your action detecting if something is off, right? And so we're not doing this at anything, right? If you have a transaction that literally moves all your assets to a known stolen account, nobody will stop that transaction, right? Which seems bizarre if you think about it, right? So the idea here, you can actually have a more active custody, right? Where instead of just your account, your key signing every single transaction, and that goes right away, you can have multi-sig, right, or split key with threshold signatures to enable that. You can also have on-chain audit registries for contracts, ensuring that when you're interacting in the wallet with the contract, it's actually being audited. It does not have existing vulnerabilities, and has bug bounty and all of the security measures. Right? So you can have all this information be more actively provided to the user, instead of just passively hoping that users will check that the contract indeed is deployed on this address, that the audits are done and somewhere linked in front end. And so all of this we need to get way better at protecting users on how they interact with the application. Now, just to show you things, this is creating a DAO on Near, and just kind of the interesting thing is because the Near accounts are contracts, you can actually turn even your account potentially into a DAO. So, for example, let's say you started by creating a bunch of art and selling it as NFTs, you created a kind of a royalty on your account. Later, you can actually turn your account into a DAO and start, offer that as a way to manage those royalties and receive that revenue stream. So think of it as like your account becomes a business in a way that you can then kind of turn into your business. But the idea is like that what AstroDAO allows you to do is actually configure a number of parameters. And so AstroDAO really has flexibility to go from things like equal community of people to a full-on like a board with executive branch with treasury managers, etc. Right? So like there's a number of like different groups with different permissions and different links. And here another example is this like one-time link, one-time private key actually used to onboard users, right? So you can actually generate a one-time key that allows you to send a single transaction that claims NFT, that creates an account and claims NFT, right? And so, this example, you could send to the tutorial that you can receive just the email link or SMS, the Telegram, and if you don't have an account, you just set up an account. And as soon as you do it, you actually have an NFT in your wallet. So that's kind of as simple as this. Like people don't need to think about install MetaMask, or figure out like how to get crypto to claim an NFT, etc. They just like send them a link, boom, they're in blockchain, they have an NFT. They can send anything, right? You can send money to people who don't have accounts yet, because you don't need to know their account before starting. Now I'll just quickly go over what's next. There's a bunch of stuff that already here, but we're still kind of only starting for real. And so the kind of a bunch of infrastructure is still missing. I think like privacy is probably one of the biggest things that like we all love to talk about, but it's still like blockchain right now is still a transparency engine, not a privacy engine. Obviously, we can do a lot with doing all this compression as the Spartan folks were talking about. Governance is a big thing. If we want people to govern, like, we need to have tools to give people to govern, right? Because right now, one token about vote kind of thing doesn't fully work. You need community-governed AI. Like, as my background is in AI, we're kind of getting into a lot of interesting space in AI, but they're still controlled by few corporations. Like, we need to unlock this and kind of hook it in with all that in the system. We are working on actually some research in synchronous sharding to actually scale up some things like Aurora. And then I think, and I mentioned this, like traditional finance and DeFi and merging together, bringing together to kind of bring real world assets, bringing crypto and banking together. So the process like Nearpay, for example, getting a banking license is an example of something that is very powerful. The other thing is that in reality, users for the most part don't really care which application their stuff, like which chain the application they're using is on, if it's smooth enough for them to use, right? And so the idea is to add so-called remote accounts, which allows you to kind of hide from the user kind of the specifics of the blockchain the application is on. So you log in with your wallet, MetaMask, Phantom, etc., to the application, and then it figures out how to bridge your things and how to kind of show you data from the right chain. And so there's a lot of kind of pieces to make this happen, but what this will allow to do is to actually kind of abstract out like users and applications kind of from the chain specifically. And obviously beyond that, right, is we talked about, like I talked about social, but so there's a whole graph I have of components that's needed to bring social to Web3. And so we really need to start doing this right now, because I think like a lot of the social is going to be pretty crumbling, like for various reasons, right? The social graph is probably one of the biggest pieces, but also reputation, certification, and kind of communication messaging that we do. So just to mention, as I finish up, we have a NearCon in September in Lisbon, so everybody's welcome. And if you have questions, let me know.
speaker. Am I